Kriti Mehta, and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he raised the Jimmy Lai case and Uyghur rights with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He also says talks made progress on trade, travel and resetting UK-China relations. Iran says its armed forces are ready to respond immediately to any US strike. The warning comes as President Trump reiterates military threats and US forces deploy to the region. European Union foreign ministers are expected to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. The move follows a deadly crackdown on protests, European Union's top diplomat says. Two US federal agents involved in the fatal shooting of intensive care nurse Alex Preddy during an immigration operation in Minneapolis have been placed on administrative leave as per the DHS. The move follows national outrage over the death and comes as protests and scrutiny of federal enforcement continue. Israel's parliament gives initial approval to the 2026 state budget, averting an immediate early election. The spending plan still faces a tough final vote amid coalition divisions. Dozens are killed after RSF drones hit the town of Dilling in South Kordofan. As per local media reports, the strikes target military positions and a central market. China executes 11 people linked to Myanmar-based scam gangs. As the state media reports, Beijing says the move targets key figures in cross-border cybercrime. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Cúcuta for a short flight to Ochana. All right, viewers, on to the top focus now on this bulletin. The Turkish foreign minister has said that Turkey will offer to help resolve tension between Washington and Tehran with Iran's top diplomat visits. This comes as Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is expected to meet his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi on Friday. Meanwhile, according to reports, Turkey is considering contingency plans along its border if the United States attacks Iran. Reports suggest that if the US attacks and the regime falls, Turkey plans to enforce a stronger border security measures. This includes increasing deployment of technological border systems and boosting troop numbers. Turkey, which shares a 530-kilometer border with Iran, has long opposed military action against the Islamic Republic. Peter Baum, editor at the Weekly Blitz, joins me in this discussion from London. Peter, thanks very much. Of course, Turkey continues to be a close ally of both the parties. How tough is this mediation for the country going to be?
Yeah, now this is very important for Turkey. Let me explain why. As we've seen in the last few weeks, Turkey has been the prime mediator between the Trump administration and the Iranians. The last thing, and why? The last things the Turks want is a war to break out between the US and Iran, because that will mean that hundreds of thousands of Iranians will leave Iran and go into Turkey. Turkey knows from previous experience, for example in Syria, that thousands and thousands of Syrians came into Turkey. They could not be accommodated, and one of the reasons Turkey was so insistent on backing the new Syrian regime was to ensure that the flow of Syrians back to Turkey happened. The last thing that Turkey wants at the moment is for Iranians to cross the border. Now, don't forget, the border between Iran and Syria is something like 540 kilometers, about 340 miles. It's to the east of Turkey and to the northwest of Iran, and it's a very, very mountainous region. But nevertheless, if war breaks out, thousands of Iranians will make the journey and cross that border and go into Turkey, which is something that the Turks do not want to happen at any cost. And that's why not only are they threatening to reinforce the border, but they're doing it as we speak. It's not a question of when. They are actually going through the motions now of increasing border security. But it's a very, very difficult border to patrol because, as I've said, it's very long and very, very mountainous.
Right, Peter, to stay on with us as we now give some more information to our viewers. The European Union foreign ministers are also expected to agree today to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. This comes after a deadly crackdown on mass protests in Iran. The decision will be made during a meeting in Brussels, where the ministers will discuss further measures in response to the Iranian regime's actions. Let's in fact listen in to what a European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas had to say.
The main topic is Iran. We are putting new sanctions on the list, and I also expect that we agree on listing the Iran Revolutionary Guard on the terrorist list. This will put them on the same footing with Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Daesh. If you act as a terrorist, you should also be treated as terrorist.
Meanwhile, Kallas has also stated that she could not imagine European Union countries creating a separate army among recent calls for a European force, including from European Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius. Earlier this week, NATO boss Mark Rutte dismissed calls by some leading European politicians for a separate European army, prompted by doubts over Donald Trump's commitment to the continent's security that were heightened by tension over Greenland. Let's listen in to Kallas's statements.
Well, every European country has an army, and 23 countries' armies are also part of NATO structures. So I can't imagine that countries will create a separate European army. So it has to be the armies that already exist. So we need to see how that works in practice. For me, it is understandable that in military you have to have a very straight and understandable chain of command, so that whenever something happens, it's clear who gives orders to whom. If we create parallel structures, then it's just going to blur the picture, and in times of trouble, the orders might just fall between them.
And Peter continues to stay with us in this discussion. Peter, of course, European Union now realizing how crucial it is for it to reduce reliance on the United States as far as its defense is concerned. But let's talk about the statement that's coming in from Kallas. How prepared really is the European Union, or what really does it need now to prepare to reduce that dependence on the US?
The US have demanded that NATO countries, those European countries in NATO, increase spending on defence from 3% of GDP to 5%. That's going to take another decade before we get there. In truth, there's not one European nation, including the United Kingdom, that has the ability to fight a prolonged war without the help of the United States. The UK's military has been run down significantly in the last decade. We've seen how the best of the French military was defeated by a ragtag army of militants in North Africa, in Niger, in Mali, Burkina Faso, etc. And the other European nations, as we've seen, have no appetite to put boots on the ground, as it were, as we've seen in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. They're quite happy to pump money into Ukraine to prolong the war, and I may add, while simultaneously buying Russian energy, so they were backing both sides. So Europe at the moment is in no fit state, whether it was a combined army, which would be absolutely disastrous, or individual nations that historically have been very strong militarily, such as the UK, France and Germany. The best that the European nations would be able to do at the moment would be to act as some kind of peacekeeping force, and that hasn't historically gone down well. We've seen how the Irish and Spanish failed miserably between in Lebanon. Absolutely two hopeless militaries that were not able to stop any terrorist attacks or any Israeli incursions. So the words of Callas, the rhetoric, frankly, are meaningless. The European Union, being allied with the United States, would be totally dependent on the United States to get involved in any military activity. Now, of course, the UK and France could potentially help when it comes to the Air Force and maybe the Navy. But in terms of the military, as I say, the forces have been run down. We have ill-equipped troops, and we're not up to speed as we should be, as Donald Trump has expected us to be with the increase in spending for those European countries allied to NATO.
Right. Peter, now as far as designating IRGC as a terrorist organization is concerned, France had posed a roadblock given its personnel in the embassy there in Tehran. Do you think this is soon going to be a reality if France also gets its personnel back and everybody is in a concurrence?
Okay, I think this is an indication of how far behind the curve the European Union is. To have a meeting later today or tomorrow whereby they may call the IRGC a terrorist group such as with Hamas and Al-Qaeda is frankly symbolic rhetoric, and truthfully will have absolutely no meaning whatsoever in practicality. What should be done, in my opinion, is that Iranian embassies in those countries should all be closed. That would be a significant act. But just to say, oh no, the IRGC are a terrorist group, so what? Really, what on earth will that do in practicality? It's just more rhetoric from the European Union. It looks as if they are anti the Iranian regime, whereas we know they would do everything they can to accommodate the Iranian regime, which they have been doing for the last 4 or 5 decades. So it's got to the point now where Donald Trump and his administration are calling the shots. He expects the European Union to act. Just by announcing them as a terrorist organisation and imposing yet more sanctions on them, frankly, is going to be meaningless.
All right, Peter, thanks very much then for your comments and for joining us here. And moving on now, viewers, US private equity firm Carlyle has agreed to purchase the majority of Lukoil's foreign assets. This sale is valued at $22 billion, and it comes as Lukoil faces pressure from US sanctions. The deal involves Lukoil's international division, which includes operations across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and Mexico. This deal also includes significant assets like Iraq's West Kurna 2 oil field and refineries in Bulgaria and Romania. Carlyle has also pledged to ensure operational continuity and job preservation while stabilizing the asset base. The pressure on Lukoil comes amid intensifying talks to end Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. With the US sanctions on Russian companies in place since February 2022, Lukoil has been working to sell off assets worldwide, including those in Kazakhstan, which are not part of this deal. The Carlyle is moving forward with the purchase. Other major companies, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, have also shown interest in Lukoil's assets. However, the final approval still hinges on ongoing regulatory reviews from the United States Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, as well as other regulatory bodies involved in sanction enforcement and international transactions. All right, Professor Wesleyan Popovsky, Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, joins me in this discussion from Thailand. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, what are your first comments on Lukoil stopping its expansion?
Yes, it seems this time it may work, because we remember in October when Gunvor, another company, wanted to buy the shares of Lukoil. The United States suspected that that company is linked to Russia, and they didn't allow that to happen. But yes, this time Carlyle is very well known, large company, and based in many countries, but headquartered in the United States. And this time it may work. Lukoil, as you mentioned, have a lot of assets in 18 countries, totaling 22 billion. And it has been on sale for some time. And finally, those assets, which are mostly fuel stations, but also refineries in Romania, in Bulgaria, they need a new owner, obviously, because Lukoil, as well as Rosneft, are under sanctions by the United States. The company cannot work as it is. So the sale probably will be completed. I'm optimistic this may go ahead. And in such a deal, usually the interests are protected, and the guarantees, the insurances and everything else, so that there won't be any problem for Carlyle to acquire the Lukoil assets globally.
And how do you view the response that's coming in from Russia? Kremlin is saying it's still wanting and waiting for US response on Putin's offer to extend limits in expiring nuclear treaty.
Yes, that's a concern, obviously, and that's another leverage that Vladimir Putin is exercising, the expiry of the treaty and whether it will be prolonged or not. That's a game, and it's a dangerous game, because we all know how high are the stakes here. And unfortunately, both Vladimir Putin but also Donald Trump are chaotic, erratic, risky players. So they can play each other very well. They can try to manipulate not only between two of them, but also their own audiences. So it's a very complicated issue. And the hope is that some natural restraint will be exercised, because neither side, I will say, can benefit from escalating nuclear conversations. And for that matter, whatever they say, there could be always a suspicion that they exercise the nuclear card, but not really to threaten each other, rather than to achieve some other benefits. So it's complicated game. We have to watch and see.
Right. Right, Professor, do stay on with me as we move on. Because now China is also saying that it will intensify its crackdown on cross-border scam operations following exports of executions linked to criminal networks in Myanmar. State media says Beijing has executed 11 people connected to scam compounds run by Myanmar-based gangs. At a regular briefing, China's foreign ministry said it will deepen international law enforcement cooperation to combat telecom fraud, online gambling and related crimes. Beijing described scam and gambling networks as a cancer, vowing to work with other countries to eliminate them. The announcement comes amid growing regional efforts to dismantle organized crime rings operating cross borders.
中方有关部门已经发布了消息，一段时间以来，中方同缅甸等国积极合作，打击跨境电信网络诈骗犯罪，共同铲除网赌电诈毒瘤，维护人民生命财产安全和地区国家交往合作秩序，取得显著成效。中方将继续深化国际执法合作，加大力度打击电诈网赌及其他相关跨境犯罪活动，共同铲除赌诈毒瘤。
All right, Professor Weslin continues to stay with us. Professor, while we are talking about public executions in more repressive regimes like Taliban, hardly any such news comes out of China because of the authoritarian regime that it is. But really, all these executions are also going on in the country. How do you respond to, the latest that's coming in?
You're right. We usually we don't hear much about the death penalties in China, but they are massive. This is the country with the most death penalties in the world. There are statistics issued by human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. Some United Nations report also do that. Yes, I'm a strong advocate against the death penalty, and I spent most of my life arguing against the death penalty. On the other hand, the fact that those scams, frauds are limited and restricted by proper measures in terms of investigating, identifying who are those behind, and taking action, sometimes severe as it might be with the death penalty, is good. That somehow the crime of cyber crimes, these are fraudsters that basically seduce some people on internet to make investment, and these are pyramids that usually basically crack down and people lose their money. And some people actually even committed suicide after that. Needs to be addressed. So it's a big crime run by networks, including some argue with the Myanmar officials in the borders between China and Myanmar. So the crime needs to be combated. And for that matter, we can agree that measures are necessary, although, as I said, death penalty is not the solution here. They should be life sentences. And we see 11 people being sentenced to death and executed, but also 28 other suspects have been convicted to various terms in jail. So the fight against cybercrime should continue, obviously.
Right. Professor, thanks then very much for joining me. And moving ahead now, viewers, dozens of people were killed in a drone attack by the paramilitary Rapid Support Force on the key Sudanese town of Dilling in South Kordofan. The attack has targeted the Sudanese Army's 54th Brigade headquarters and the central market using suicide drones. This comes just after the Sudanese armed forces broke the RSF's nearly 2-year-long siege of the town, reclaiming vital supply lines. Since the siege was lifted, Dilling has experienced multiple drone strikes, causing severe damage to infrastructure and resulting in numerous casualties. Amid these attacks, the Sudan Doctors Network has called for urgent humanitarian aid to deliver life-saving supplies to the region. The conflict, which began in April 2023, has displaced millions and caused widespread suffering, especially in areas like Kadugli, which is now facing famine. My colleague Asuma Katauka now joins us to get us more on this. Asuma, tell us more details that you're picking up.
Thank you for having me. So far we only know that through media reports, local media reports, that there was an attack and dozens were killed. As you rightfully mentioned, the suicide bombers and suicide drones that were used in this attack, which is already besieged territory where a lot of people have been already killed. Reports show that dozens more people have been killed in this attack, and the latest attack, which took place on Wednesday this week. So this took place in the area of Dilling, which includes a lot of headquarters of these Sudanese Army's 54th Brigade and some Sudanese tribal groups over there. We also know that SAF, which is the side which is affiliated with or aligned with Sudanese government, is also used to have a stronghold there. So they are fighting in that area. And Dilling also lies halfway through North Kordofan and South Kordofan. So this is a central area between these two areas, and although a lot of cities have been under fire because of the 3-year war between SAF and RSF, this is a new town that has also come up under fire for now. That's all.
All right, Asuma, thanks very much then for filling us and our viewers for all that information. And with that, viewers, we're bringing you some technology news as always before we wrap up the bulletin. Now, Amazon has confirmed 16,000 corporate jobs cuts and completing a plan around 30,000 since October 2025, while leaving open possibilities of further reductions. According to reports, Amazon was planning a second round of layoffs as part of its broader goal under CEO Andy Jassy, who has been trying to reduce bureaucracy and abandon underperforming businesses. Meanwhile, Amazon has said that it was closing its remaining brick-and-mortar fresh grocery stores and Go markets despite years of effort, and it was dropping its Amazon One biometric payment system, which scans the palm of a customer's hand. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World for all international news and updates.